Good morning, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I am Amelia Vance from the Future of Privacy Forum, and I'm really thrilled to have all of you here for our K-12 Privacy Leaders meeting focused on security. As many of you know, there has been a lot of concern recently since there have been a lot of districts hacked by some malicious hackers known as the dark overlords, as well as the normal hacks that districts face every day. So today we brought in a couple of really great speakers to talk about all this. Ross Lemke from the U.S. Department of Education and Lance Lennon, who's going to talk about the perspective from several Iowa districts. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Ross. Just so everyone knows, today's webinar is recorded due to several requests from people who couldn't make it. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in group chat. So with that, I am now going to turn things over to Ross.
Thanks, Amelia, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ross Lemke. I'm with the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, part of the U.S. Department of Education. I know many of you on this call. Also, Amelia said I have 30 minutes to talk about data security. I could go on about this for much, much longer. So I will be breezing through some of this material. Also, I imagine that I am preaching to the choir today, but without further ado, let's talk about FERPA and data security. So, what specific technology controls does FERPA require for your IT systems? And for those of you who know FERPA, you know the answer. Yep, nothing, nada, zilch. So, how come FERPA doesn't tell me how to protect these student records? Well, as you know, FERPA was written in 1974. And I mean, there's a lot going on in 1974. Computers were big, big things sitting in, data centers somewhere, sitting in the basements of buildings. They weren't readily accessible to schools. I mean, if you wanted to go find your education records, they were pretty much locked in a file cabinet in the principal's office. You had Nixon going on, disco was still a thing. So FERPA addresses data security through something called reasonable methods. Now, I am one of the few people that will get in front of an audience and say that they love FERPA. FERPA, it takes a lot of heat recently, but I actually love FERPA because FERPA is a survivor. This through the concept of reasonable methods. Because FERPA is not telling you how to do it. FERPA tells you that you need to use reasonable methods. So a reasonable method for protecting student information in 1974 could be locking the principal's office or locking the file cabinet. What's reasonable today could be, encryption, robust passwords, firewalls. We generally interpret reasonable methods to mean a set of security controls that are in line with currently accepted security and privacy best practices for data of a similar sensitivity. Some things, points that you should really remember. You should know yourself, know your adversaries, know how much risk is okay, and you should be deploying security controls to mitigate that risk to acceptable levels. Now, the reason I love FERPA, though, is what's reasonable in 1974 is obviously not reasonable today. And what's reasonable today is probably not going to be reasonable 5 years from now, or might not even be reasonable 6 months from now. So to a degree, FERPA evolves with the technology. Now, the three pillars of reasonable methods are technology, policies, and training. And often in our experience, technology can be the easy part. It's really when you get down to the person level, those policies and how your staff are trained on those policies and how your staff is trained on information security. So why are we even talking about data security? So FERPA requires it through something called reasonable methods. Your students absolutely deserve it. A breach could cause reputational harm for your agencies, or obviously it could cause a lot more harm than just to your agencies. It's going to cause harm to the students whose data you've lost. It can cause financial harm to your agency. Electronic records are more prevalent than ever, and we collect more, move more, use more, and lose more data than ever before. So let's talk about cybersecurity budget, shall we? We have the Pentagon. They have a cyber budget of $6.7 billion. And guess what? They get owned all of the time. You're constantly hearing about data breaches involving DoD. So let's talk about your average school district. Your cybersecurity budget might be that of a school gym teacher. Kind of terrifying, really, because people sometimes ask me what keeps me awake at night, and if it's not my kids or me wondering whether I turned the oven off, it's me wondering what's going on in these small school districts. We hear a lot about data breaches at big retailers or insurance companies or Equifax. We hear about those because those organizations are big and they have the technical capacity to even know that they've had a breach. But when you're talking about these small school districts or a charter school, where your IT staff might really be the gym teacher or the secretary or vice principal, do they even have the technological skills or capacity to understand or know that they have had a data breach? That's what worries me, because there's a lot of organizations that are keeping data on data breaches, and again, a lot of we hear about are the ones that get reported. What's really terrifying, I think, are the ones that aren't reported. So let's get some illusions out of the way. Secure doesn't exist. You're never going to be 100% secure. So really, data security is all about managing risk. How much, where are your crown jewels? What are the risks inside of your organization? What steps are you taking to mitigate that risk? As we work with school districts and post-secondary institutions, we see a number of problems in education data systems. We're seeing a ton of old or unpatched software. If you're familiar with the Internet of Things is a really big thing right now. And when you think about technology in schools, a lot you logically initially think of your student information systems or perhaps apps in the classroom. But what you might not think about are those security cameras or those smart HVAC systems. A lot of more devices than ever these days are built with internet connectivity, and a lot of schools we're finding are getting these devices and plugging them into their networks and then forgetting about them, or they plug them into their networks and they don't bother updating any of the passwords. So there's default usernames and passwords. So server room cameras, sensors, surveillance systems, access card readers, HVAC, boilers. If you know where to look, it's readily apparent that a lot of them are out there on the internet right now, and a lot of them are wide open to anybody who can find them. We recently did a security training for post-secondary, and we were able to, just to illustrate this point, we had there was a camera feed from a university in Wisconsin that they had their security cameras set up, no username, no login, no password, so nobody's hacking into anything. You could just, all you needed to know was the website to go to, and you could see the camera, you could see the students, you could see the professors right out there on the internet. And this is a university that's actually got an IT budget and security staff. Imagine your charter school or your school district that's got, just has two elementary schools. Are they patching these devices? So whenever we go to a state or a district, we tend to go and look on the internet and see what's sort of going on the ground level, to see what kind of problems that we might see. One afternoon before we went off to a state, we just, searching the internet and sites like Shodan and things like that, looking for problems in that space. Just a single afternoon, we noticed 626 machines that did not have a firewall. We actually found 2 SIS breaches that we were able to go contact the districts and let them know about. Hundreds of anonymous FTP servers, 143 Windows XP machines, some of which had already been hacked, 10 virtual private networks running out of date Windows 2003 server, 835 web servers running IIS 6.0 or earlier. So, people often ask themselves, well, how did this happen? How did we get hacked? Well, sometimes you're making it really, really easy on the bad guys. Windows XP, that's not supported anymore. All the vulnerabilities are well known out there. A lot of, Windows 2003, these old VPNs. Prior to going to a state recently, we found a school district that was running a firewall. That's great, you're running a firewall. Firewalls are fantastic. That firewall's end of life was in 2008. That firewall had not been patched in nearly 10 years. These are these are big problems. So this is just the technology side of things, and I think I'm talking to a lot of technology people in the audience here. So just keeping your own house in order, making sure that you're updating your systems and patching your systems is going to reduce your vulnerability. But really, that weak link is the people. Now, back in early 90s, late 80s, you actually had to know something to hack, to hack into things. You had to know something about computers. These days, it's really easy. Just go to your computers right now and Google how to hack. Actually, you might not want to do that with on your district connections. They might frown upon that. But you go to Google or go to YouTube and Google how to hack. There's tutorials. You can go and download packages. You can go to the dark web and you can pay people to go build hacking tools for you. It's not hard anymore. And oftentimes, as technologists, we make it really easy. So Google can be a hacker's best friend. This particular Google search string is looking for files called web.config. If looking at the results here, and it's probably very hard to see on the screen, but we're looking for web.config files that have not been properly secured. These are web.config files on web servers. These particular files are going to reveal lots of sensitive information for us, specifically administrative passwords to applications, databases, and other assets. No hacking skills were needed in this. This is just some Google foo. So there's an online database of useful Google search terms. They're called the Google Dorks, the Google Hacking Database. Using these things, you can spot misconfigurations, find vulnerable servers, discover PII, passwords, sensitive documents, things like that. So one of the results we got here was a community emergency response team. Well, it looks like the emergency is one of these cyber proportions in this case, because their web.config was exposed and it contained connection data for a database, including username and passwords for the administrator. So when your web server gets hacked and gets defaced, and you ask how it happened. Well, it could be that you're running an Apache version that was 4 years too old, or you didn't set this up properly in the first place and you left your web.config exposed right out there, and the bad guy noticed it and decided to take advantage of it. How else is a school district vulnerable? So most phishing emails are easy to notice, but I've worked in the K-12 space since 2005. I'm somewhat sophisticated. I know that a lot of school districts out there have their staff directories, published on their websites. So if I were a bad guy, I would just go and look for that staff directory. I'm going to go find your superintendent's name. I'm going to go look for the people in the the directory that have IT or technology in their names. And I'm going to go and send a phishing email. It's not hard. I'm going to spoof that email to come from the superintendent. I'm going to have a red exclamation mark on it. I'm going to send it at maybe 8:50 in the morning or something before you've had your second cup of coffee, and I'll address it to you and say, hey, Bob, I'm sorry about the last minute nature of this, but I need to go and present this new IT security policy to the school board, and I have a meeting at 9:30. I meant to send this last night, but it got stuck in my outbox. I really apologize for this, but if you could go ahead and take a look at this and give me your feedback on it. Not looking for a book, just send me some high-level bullet points. If you could send this to me by 9:30, I'd really appreciate it. Are you going to open that attachment? Odds are you will, and if you don't, if I send this information to 20 people in your organization, I only need one of you to open it. So what are the threats out there? We have our internal threats. These are your mistakes. This could be intentional misconduct or curiosity. You have your external threats. These are your bad guys, your hackers, the social engineering attacks, malware. These internal wounds. And I mean, before I even did this presentation, I looked at some of the most recent data breaches that we had data on. Chronologically, of the last 5 that we had information on, 3 of them were because of self-inflicted wounds. 1 was lost hardware, and 2 were because of phishing attacks. So if you think about it, concentrating your resources, training your staff, obviously we're talking small sample size, but just addressing that element of your risk profile is a great use of resources. So what are some of these self-inflicted wounds? Obviously falling for phishing emails, clicking on stuff. This is your unsafe browsing habits, using that free Wi-Fi. Pineapples, those are devices that spoof Wi-Fi hotspots are cheap. They're very easy to obtain. At a recent conference, we brought ours with us and set it up. And we named it AT&T Wi-Fi. Now, it wasn't connected directly to the internet, but we just had it up there just to see what was connecting to it. We had, within a minute, we had 20 devices connected to it, including the devices of people that were in our audience. And it's hard to get audience response on these things, but if you've ever stayed at a Hilton property, odds are you've connected to an AT&T Wi-Fi hotspot before, because that's their default hotspot there. So people that have been staying at Hilton properties had their workstations and their phones, I might add, set up to automatically connect to Wi-Fi. These devices automatically connected to us, and they were there. Now, of course, if we were bad guys, we could go do things like mess with the internet traffic, replace all the image references of, whatever news articles they were surfing, replace the image references with images of cats. Or we could go and show, well, here's all the sites that you guys have been visiting when you should be paying attention to our security presentations. Actually, we don't do that one much anymore, because for one district it became an HR issue for one of their staff members. But you have to admire their courage of visiting some of those sites during our presentations. But think about your staff and what they're sending via email or what they're accessing, and if they're connected to one of these compromised hotspots. Again, we don't do anything. We're good guys. but there's, a lot of bad people out there looking to do bad things. Sending attachments with PII. My name is Ross. That's a fairly uncommon name. There are two people in the Department of Education with the first name of Ross that we often, this Ross and myself, we work with the same people. I get Ross's email all of the time, and he gets my email as well. So think about it, if you are working in the front office of a school and somebody calls you right before lunch, hey, can you send me this spreadsheet with student data in it? I need it for a meeting, so you're in a hurry to get out the door, and you go and write the email, you attach the document or the spreadsheet, and you type in the person's first name, which is Sarah, and you click send. Oh, well, your sister's name also happens to be Sarah, and you email your sister more than you email this person that was asking you for the data, and you autocomplete, put the wrong Sarah in there, and now you've got student data heading outside your district. It's very, very easy for this kind of stuff to happen. Enemies at the gate. What are the bad guys out there? The tools at their disposal. You have malware, ransomware, application hacking. Yeah, there is hacking going on out there, but social engineering is far bigger threat. Your man-in-the-middle attacks, denial of service, mobile remote attacks, third party. So these bad guys out here, you have your cyber criminals. They're in it for the money. They're the ones looking to conduct ID theft, W-2 scams, financial crimes. We have our employees. They could be just looking, occasionally malicious, bad fingers, bad habits, your whoops moments. Road warriors, people leaving their laptops at a Starbucks, or having it stolen off the conveyor belt at TSA security at the airport. I gave a presentation about a year ago for a state conference, and usually when I do those types of events, I talk about some of the data breaches that happened in that state. And in this particular audience for the state, I talked about an example for a charter school that had a major data breach. That on Friday they had a disgruntled employee that they let go on a Friday, and it was a charter school, so they didn't think that to cut off that user's student information system access or their network access. So they went home on Friday, and they had 1,500 students when they went home. When they got back into school on Monday, they had 50 students left in the student information system. That disgruntled employee had gone in and deleted all of that data. You have your hacktivists. These are your website defacements. They're sometimes it's the people that they're outing security fails. They notice a vulnerability in their network. They let you know, hey, you guys have some problems. You should fix this. And then if you ignore them, they go and start releasing student data. Oftentimes they're motivated by attention, or they're looking for that low-hanging fruit. So some key points to understand in all of this: that your data will get breached. It is not a question of if you are going to have a data breach. It's a matter of when you have a data breach. And we're talking about information security and data and computers, but again, remember, FERPA was written in 1974. It was focused on the protection of paper records. Paper is still at risk as well. Leaving records on a desk where anybody can see them, or taking sensitive information and throwing it away in the trash and having it somebody going dumpster diving and picking that information out. That's just as much of a data breach. You are never going to have enough resources to be secure. I don't think anybody in this audience has unlimited resources. So because of this, it's all about how you prepare. Now, I think most of you recognize the food pyramid. The chief security officer at Facebook has a slide very similar to that, and where he has the food pyramid laid out in a similar structure. So we like that. We wanted to do a similar thing for, the perspective of data breaches in education. Our security pyramid looks a little something like this. We have your user behaviors at the bottom. Then above that, we have phishing, malware. Above that, we have our vulnerable or legacy software. Up, in a much smaller, footprint here, we have our, advanced persistent threats. These are your hackers, people that are trying to bust into your network. Up at the very, very tippy top, actually, you can't see it yet. Let me zoom in a little. Okay, still, we're not quite there yet. Let me drill down a little bit more. All the way down here, we have our zero-day attacks. Now, while worrying about the zero-day threat is sexy and it can capture our mind, it's a really, really small threat compared to the others. So if we look at the others here, if you look at the bottom of this pyramid, this phishing, the malware, and your user behaviors, if you focus your resources on this area, you're going to get a lot of bang for the buck. Let's talk about social engineering a little bit more. The definition of social engineering is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. For any of you that, have indulged in penetration testing against your networks, there are companies that go out and do this. Oftentimes, these services, they take social engineering off of the table. The reason they do that is social engineering is usually an automatic win. Odds are, with social engineering, they're going to get in some way. So how does it, what form does this take? This is your phishing emails, your spear phishing, going after a select few people going in your organization, or whaling, going after the bigwig, sending that email to the superintendent, asking them to approve a purchase order to this particular account. This, types of purchase orders that your superintendent might be approving all of the time. And if they're not wary, they might be approving a purchase order that's fraudulent. We have several examples of this thing happening. Even the company that I work for, we've been attacked that way. They haven't been successful because we're vigilant, but people are coming after you. Just don't think just because you work for a school that you're not a target. So everybody's aware of that, the Nigerian prince scam, but sometimes they come after you in other ways. Our website monitoring tool has detected several attempts to access content at inappropriate websites. To review those websites and provide a justification, please click on this link to prevent your login from being disabled and your supervisor from being notified. Oh gosh, I did some Christmas shopping last week. Am I in trouble for that? I better go and click this link. If they're we've heard some good ones, over the years. Now, one that you really need to be concerned about is the W-2 phishing. This happened last year or this year, and it's going to happen again next year. This is a phishing scam targeting schools and educational institutions. It's spear phishing conducted through email. They're focusing on HR and payroll staff. The goal is to obtain employee data to file false returns. So how this works is you have your bad guy. They use the internet to go find out information about the schools. Maybe they're even making phone calls to the schools. They're looking for key people, the positions they're in, email addresses. Once they have this information, they go back and they masquerade as a person of authority, CEO, boss, superintendent. They send an email to HR, payroll employees, asking for copies of W-2s before they go out. The unwary victim sends those out and go and can get, basically send the W-2s to the bad guys, who then in turn file fraudulent tax returns with the IRS. So what are some steps that you can take to combat social engineering? You can train users on information security annually. This training should include things like phishing, safe browsing habits. I'm familiar with many districts these days that are starting to phish their own employees, sending out test phishing emails to see who clicks, and those people that are clicking use that as training opportunities for those employees that are might click on the email for that password complexity tester or some similar seemingly legitimate type of email. Should always ensure that your connections are secure when you're going to websites. Have users validate links before clicking, and having your employees know who to contact in the event of an issue. If they have accidentally click on an email, and mistakes do happen, have them have a culture in place so that they know where to go for help, and have some culture of at least encouraging them to ask for help. Because once you actually know about the problem, they can go and perhaps stop problems before it becomes a major crisis. Do not rely on technology alone. Now, what can you do as an organization? You should make a good, reasonable policy that is backed up by leadership. You should do a risk assessment threshold, looking at your own at your own networks and your own people, and determine what is your risk threshold. You should conduct training coupled with security awareness. You should develop an incident response plan. If when I go out on the field, I'll usually ask audiences, who has a data breach response plan? Not a lot of districts raise their hands. Now, many districts they'll have an active shooter plan. They'll have a tornado plan, or earthquake plan. Not a lot of them have data breach response plans. And the problem with that is when the data breach does happen, the people at the district aren't prepared, and they oftentimes underreact or they overreact. At PTAC, we have a data breach response exercises. We have data breach response checklist that you can use to, I wouldn't say steal such a harsh word, but use leverage our own materials to come up with your own plan. But once you have an incident response plan, it's no good if people aren't aware of the plan. Train your staff on the plan and test the plan. And finally, think like a hacker. Think like a bad guy. So I see some questions here. Will the slideshow be made available? I'll send the slideshow to Amelia, and she can send it out to the audience. And again, like she said, this presentation is being recorded. Now, looking at this slide, these bullets, I think I need to highlight a couple points. One, leadership. For those of you who work in a district, when does leadership tend to consider something important? Unfortunately, it's usually after something bad has happened. And it's our job to stress and make this a priority before something bad happens. Because if something bad has happened, it's already too late. So you need to get leadership to buy in on this. Because if leadership doesn't buy in, then it's not going to be important. So if you do security training and, if people are blowing it off or joking through it, I got more important things to do. If your leadership is right there with the staff taking that security training, that can really highlight to the people at the ground level that, hey, this is so important that the superintendent is taking this right along with me. Training. We see lots of scary stuff out there, vulnerabilities out there in this space that, don't sit through this presentation and run out and buy a lot of new equipment. Make the equipment that you have work better. And the single best bang for the buck that you have for lowering your risk is training. And yes, if you send out the phishing email to your staff, you might get 40% of your staff clicking on the first time. Well, maybe the next time it's 30%. Or maybe next time, time after that's 20%. I take IT security training multiple times a year, probably 3 times as, through the Department of Education and several times through my own company. And a lot of times this covers the same information, but eventually it starts to sink in. You start to you start to develop a culture of awareness and, focus on this area. Ultimately, think like a bad guy. Look at your own networks and your own people and think, well, if I wanted to hack myself, how would I do this? What vulnerabilities would I focus on? Now, enterprise controls only extend to the network boundary. You might have the most extensive, fanciest, patched, up-to-date firewall in the world. It's no good when your users go to the coffee shop or take their laptops home and leave their laptops in the car. So I'm briefly, because I'm running out of time, I'm going to talk about some common threats out there that are affecting users and some steps that users can take to reduce risk. 1, use encryption. Full disk encryption on your workstations, your servers. A lot of operating systems have encryption available as, right out of the box as part of the operating system. Take advantage of that. So when a laptop does get stolen, they can't just pop the hard drive out of it, put it in a USB caddy and suck all the data out. If it's encrypted, you're going to make it a lot harder to get at that data, and odds are you're going to avoid a more serious incident. Like I said earlier, verify websites that are secure by visually checking. It has to say HTTPS. The lock icon can be spoofed. Treat all Wi-Fi as untrusted Wi-Fi. Use strong passwords. Passwords are a passion of mine. Check links in emails and documents before clicking through them. Never plug in a strange flash drive. It's very easy to put malware on flash drives so that when they plug it into the to the laptop or the computer, little box comes up, something gets executed, and now they have root access to the system. Set a screen lock. There are data breaches that have happened because a secretary did not lock their screen, and a student goes in and copies things off to a thumb drive. It's, people think, well, it's just email. Like what problems can email cause? What happened, actually, I just did this today with one of my ex-employees. I was stopping to see somebody that they worked with, and they left their screen up and their email's there. I can sit down there, I can send whatever email I want from there. It is a risk. It is a vulnerability there. And when you leave your computers unlocked, maybe one time it's not going to be you're the person that hired you, but it could be a person, a student or somebody that has a grudge against you that could do something malicious with your workstation with your credentials. Set a screen lock. I can't stress it enough. And not just on your computers, on your phones. So if you lose your phone, if your phone is stolen, they can't just go get in there and get all your contacts, get at all your emails. I live in Fairfax County, Virginia. If you don't work for the government, odds are you work for a contractor that is working for the government. Just this summer, 2 of my sons were playing rugby this summer. Before our first game, I was walking my six-year-old to his very first rugby game, walking through grass that was 2 feet tall. Now, mind you, my 6-year-old is completely incapable of finding his own socks in the morning, but as he was walking to his game, he reached down and he picked up a cell phone. And of course, being the 6-year-old, he's like, oh boy, free cell phone, I get to play games. So of course, I told him to hand it over, and I took the cell phone and I pressed the home button, and I was right into the phone. Now, if I were a bad guy, I could access the email, I could send emails, I could do whatever I wanted. Obviously, being the good guy, I called the person's wife and said, hey, I found your husband's cell phone. You can go ahead and pick it up here. Oh, by the way, you probably want to consider using screen locks because here are all the bad things I could have done if I wasn't such a nice person. Finally, patch and update your systems regularly, especially for third-party applications. Passwords, let's just talk about passwords really quick. again, because a lot of organizations brag about their password policies. We make them reset it every 60 days. And, password needs to have 3 special characters and a silent Q. If you have a password policy that's like that, what are your users going to do? Their odds are they're going to write down the password. And if they write down the password is not secure. The password is useless. So a password like this, how secure is that password? A brute force computer that's trying to bust in, it's going to take them 9 hours to crack that password. Grand scheme of things, that's probably not a very secure password. But how about a password like this? I love my mom. You know what? That's a pretty easy password to remember. I'm probably not going to have to write that password down. That password would take 429 billion years to crack. So even with your own passwords, think outside the box when you're coming up with your own passwords. These sentences or phrases can be a very secure password, and it can be a very easy password for you to remember. Just want to give one final discussion on this free Wi-Fi, illustrate how this works. And again, I apologize for moving quickly. I usually take about 60 to 90 minutes to talk about data security. I'm trying to squeeze this into 30 minutes. I know I'm already over time, but again, Wi-Fi can be convenient, but these fake Wi-Fi hotspots can fake users into connecting to a hacker system, especially if your devices are set up to connect automatically. Many of you have children on your cell phone plans. They use all of your data. To get around this, odds are you probably have them connect your home Wi-Fi automatically when they come home. Well, say you're at the Starbucks or the coffee shop, and they're connected to that free Wi-Fi access point called free Wi-Fi. If I'm a bad guy, I see this free Wi-Fi device, and I can see that, I can probably guess that people are connected to it. So I can send out a spoofed message pretending to be that access point, instructing the user's computer to disconnect. So user disconnects, and as they go and try and figure out what will happen, why can't I go and connect to YouTube to watch these funny cat videos, I set up my own device and I call it free Wi-Fi. And since I'm a bad guy, I'm not concerned with how much juice I'm pumping out. So I go pump out as much juice as I can. So when you try to reconnect, you connect to me automatically. So now when you connect to me, I become your internet service provider, which is going to allow me to monitor your traffic, intercept your traffic, and manipulate that traffic. So when you have staff that are going out in the field and connecting to these public Wi-Fi hotspots and connecting to your connecting to your network or connecting to your student information system, these are all things that can cause problems. So avoid using untrusted networks to do sensitive things. If you must, consider using a virtual private network. So if you have a system that only 10 people in the entire country need to have access to, reconsider having it connected directly to the internet. Make them go jump through a virtual private network before accessing it. So then, at least then, that traffic is going to get encrypted, and it's going to even if they're connected to one of those compromised with hotspots, it's going to reduce the possibility of information getting compromised. Be wary of odd behavior on your free Wi-Fi networks. If you're connected, I understand sometimes you don't have a mobile hotspot. Sometimes you need to connect and get some email or something. But if you're connected to free Wi-Fi network and you start experiencing frequent disconnects, slow performance, or certificate warnings, that might be a warning sign that something is wrong and you may want to disconnect to it. Don't join wireless networks automatically or just turn off Wi-Fi unless you need it. Your battery life is going to thank you. And finally, employ strong WPA2 encryption for your own wireless networks and use a long and complex passphrase. If you have a old router at home that you went and bought from Best Buy and just plugged in, right, off the shelf, odds are you might still have a default password on it that the bad guys can freely find out there on the internet. So you may want to go ahead and fix that. I know I've moved quickly through a lot of this. I've only covered probably half of the items that I want to cover, but I do want to stress that PTAC is a resource out there for you. We are happy to come talk to you about this. We're happy to consult and work with you on reducing your vulnerabilities or training your staff. I know that Amelia links to us all the time, but here's our website. Here's our contact information here. I will make these slides available, and I appreciate your time. I see some questions here. Let's see which ones I can go jump into real quick. So when some districts address digital equity for students without home access by suggesting they access free area hotspots, is that not inviting challenges? I mean, this always creates, it's this constant trade-off that you have between convenience and access, in this case equity, and information security. Some of these free area hotspots are going to be better than others. Some of them are much better at employing security, or at least having some credentialing before you go ahead and access them. But I think part of this you want to think about what information these students are accessing. Are they giving out their PII on these connections? But there are a lot of compromised Wi-Fi hotspots out there, which can create problems. So, at some point, you with your students, you start getting into areas of digital citizenship and things that they should do and should not do on the internet. Giving PII to strangers and things like that. At some point, you need to talk to them about passwords and things like and some point when they're older, talking to them about the basics of information security. But I will tell you that kids are actually pretty good at this stuff. Even my 9-year-old actually has a pretty good sense of usernames and passwords and how to get around things. Honestly, working for districts, you're probably already teaching hundreds, if not thousands, of potential hackers. Whether it's probably not going and trying to change their grades, but you might see some of those. But even things like trying to get around a web filter, so that on their Chromebook, they, instead of going and accessing Dreambox, they can go and look at YouTube Minecraft videos, or maybe that's just my kid. Yeah, and an earlier question in chat. Are the widely available VPNs trustworthy? Are there ones that are preferable, or some of those to avoid? I think the ones that you want to avoid are the ones that are old and out of date. Being a representing Department of Education on this webinar, I can't say that one product is better than another product. You want to do your due diligence on any tool that you're going to use. Oftentimes with software, you can go, there's other sources that you can reach out to us about afterwards on this email, where you can go look for vulnerabilities for particular types of software. So you can see that, if there are any active vulnerabilities for the tool that you're considering using. I'm going to scroll through here and see if there's any more questions here. I think I covered the ones that have been asked so far, but I think I've covered everything so far. So if there are no questions, I'm going to pass this back to Amelia, and thank everybody for your time. And if you have any questions, and again, we're PTAC, we're the good guys. So even if you have a problem, we're not there to get you into trouble. If you have a question, you can ask for yourselves, or you could be quote unquote asking for a friend. Everybody makes mistakes. We just want to help you reduce those mistakes and help you get better in the future. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Ross. Really, really appreciate this. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Lance Lennon. Lance, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'll go ahead and present. All right, so my name is Lance Lennon. I'm a technology director in Iowa for the Eagle Grove Community School District. We're a small school district in north central Iowa. I want to start by talking about what happened in Iowa about a month ago. It was the Dark Overlord hack. So Johnston, Iowa, which is one of Iowa's larger school districts, parents started getting texts that said it was coming from the school district, or from an individual, pardon me, saying that their children were in danger. These were very specific texts talking about the student, particular information about the student, that they would be harmed at, during this class at their school. And it became very disconcerting because it was not just random. These were actually parents who had students in that school district. They mentioned the school district. They had students in particular classes, and it was very directed. And so the concern came is, where did this information come from? How did they get this? You don't just blatantly send out text messages to people and hope that it works. It was very targeted, and they took this kind of information, and then what they did is they did a web dump, and they posted student names, student emails, student cell phone numbers, parent name, parent contact info on the web. Where did they get it? There's a little bit of discrepancy on where this information came from. The school information or student information system the school used said it wasn't from us. They did not access were not able to access our information. We show no breach of anything of any type. But it really got a lot of schools in Iowa start to think about, what do we need to do for account security for our teachers and for our student information systems to kind of make sure that we're a little more safe than this. I know that as a parent, if I had gotten that information, I would have been out of my head worrying. So as a tech director, we really started thinking about and contemplating a little harder on making sure people were safe. So my name is Lance, like I said. I'm from Eagle Grove. The average school district in Iowa is 1,400 students. That is 500,000 students over 375 public school districts. So not huge. Most schools are just like mine, right in that average range, where we run one tech director. We manage the systems. Basically anything that plugs in, we're in charge of. Information, if you ever want to reach out to me, please feel free to. Again, the slide deck I put in the chat directly to this. So the number one thing we looked at is, we're a Google for Education district. And so we want to make sure that as we use Drive more and more as our home repository, that we're making sure our accounts are safe. So what can we do to make sure that those accounts are safe? We like Google because Google has a lot of built-in security features. It does meet all the standards. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, about going to the cloud. We've kind of embraced it, we've very much embraced it, and really do our best to make sure that everything we do is secure as is possible. I thought Ross did a great job of giving an in-depth, in a short period of time, information about how to make things more secure. So I'll go more into Google. The number one thing we use is two-step authentication. If you are not using two-step authentication, if you are a Google school or any other type of cloud-based system, even if you're not cloud-based, even if you're local-based, if you can access stuff from the outside, I cannot recommend strongly enough having two-step or two-factor authentication. Inside of Google, it's done inside the security part of the admin console. We do it here. We do it, basically have certain password requirements in conjunction with two-step, and we do try to limit API access. If you also remember last spring, there was a hack that came out in Google where Google managed to stop it within an hour, but in the process of that hour, it had propagated itself who knows how many times. Someone got into the API and just realized that so many of us just say, yes, I want to give this application complete permission to all of my information. And they just hit yes, and it propagated out. They stopped it. They've actually closed that hole. But again, we look at API access and who has access to what. but I want to keep going on TwoStep. One of the things I recommend on TwoStep is using the Authenticator app on their phone. It's very easy. They log in. It says, go to your phone, open the Authenticator app, and put in the code that's there. The code changes every 60 seconds, so the odds of somebody having your username and the current code, I can't express how hard that would be. Not impossible, but hard. So I personally use the Authenticator app for most of my stuff. If you were to look at the Authenticator app on my phone, I think I have roughly right now about 10 to 12 accounts that are on there. Another thing we do is for teachers who don't have smartphones is we do provide YubiKeys. This is two-step authentication where they have to have this USB device. They plug it in, actually touch with their finger. It does not a fingerprint reader, but where you see the gold circles on those 3 types, they have to not only have physical access to it, but they not have the device itself, but physical access to it, so they have to touch it to activate their two-step. Those are the 2 that we use here. We do allow our teachers also to just have text sent to their phone for two-step authentication. Some of them use LastPass and use the two-step built into that. So inside of Google itself, those are the methods, and I cannot stress enough how important that is. We also make Chrome our default browser. We are one-to-one in grades 2 through 12 with Chromebooks for our students. Our teachers have MacBook Airs. I'll talk about the Apple side of what we do to keep things secure. But default browser, we ask that they use Chrome. Why do we? Because it auto-updates. It is, of the browsers, it is tested over and over to found to be the most secure. Again, like Ross said, nothing is 100% secure. But Chrome is proven to be the most secure, so we do ask that they use that. We give them Safari, and we do give them Firefox also, and allow them to use those if for some reason Chrome isn't working, but we ask, please use Chrome as your default browser. Not to mention, because we're a Google school, Chrome works best. Anything Google works better with Google. Like I said, as the default browser, it is more secure than others. The last part I do in the admin side as an admin is I set up Google Reports. If you are a Google for Education school district, you can go into the reports section and set up managed alerts. So I have certain alerts set up where if there was a challenge to a login, I get an email saying it was. If I have a suspicious login, meaning it's coming from somewhere that isn't normally where we do, like if it comes from Sri Lanka, if it comes from the Philippines, odds are it's probably not one of my students or one of my teachers. We also have changes to login accounts. If a password gets changed, I get notified. If account access or API access is changed, I get notified. So I build out custom reports inside of Google itself just to kind of make sure that I get information as to what is happening. And that's how we kind of try to keep our accounts secure with the Googles. Now we go on the Apple side. All of our teachers have a MacBook Air. And some of the stuff, exactly like Ross talked about, what we really try to strive is that in your security and privacy settings that you require a password on screensaver or when the computer goes to sleep, so that if you walk away, it doesn't just enable for someone to come in and start using your account. We also disable the automatic login, meaning someone has to use their password to get into their machine. So if you get a hold of someone's machine, you can bypass a sleep or a screensaver password by restarting the machine if automatic login is turned on. So that makes it almost a ridiculous security measure without the other. And then when do you set that up? When do you set up the screen share or the screensaver to come on? We tell them less is more. The sooner it comes on, the better. Yeah, it may be a pain, but truthfully, you're going to want that to happen quicker than rather than not, because you may have to run out of your room real quick, and the sooner it goes to sleep or locks, the better you are. The second thing we do is with iTunes especially, or your Apple ID, is we have them set up two-step with that. A lot of them affiliate their school email address with an Apple ID because they're on Macs and they want to install software on their computer. We tell them make sure that you set up two-step, and again, it sends out a code that they have to put in order to actually access or be able to install things on their computer. So another nice feature that we try to do. So the big question then came, where do the dark overlords get their information? And it doesn't matter what student information system you use, Aries, Infinite Campus, PowerSchool, RenWeb, Skyward, those are some of the more popular ones. looked at all of them. We do use one of these. I'd rather not say outright which one we use, but we also turned on for and looked at account access. So what's really weird is growing up, in school, my parents never knew how I was doing until we called them down slips. If you were unfortunate enough to get a down slip, you weren't doing well in school, they sent out a down slip at midterm. I think they're more likely called midterms now. And then at report card time. So 4 times a year, my parents knew how I was doing. They never really had to worry with me. I was motivated because, well, I wanted to do something. And so I did it. Now with my kids individually, is you can check, by the minute as to how your students are doing. So we try to give people this kind of access, but then we really have to look at what access are we giving people? What do they have access to? And the more accounts we make for people, the more likely it is that account is somehow going to be compromised. So we went through and audited our student information system, not only parental accounts, but then user accounts as to who had access to what, do they need that access, and really kind of pared down some of the stuff we did. It's easy to just give everybody full access because they'll only use what they need. But then once they get into, or their account gets hacked into, that person then has access to everything. So we really had to pare that down and tried to make that a little better in our district. So look at your student information system and find that out. So again, the student information system that Johnston was using claimed that they were not hacked. So where did the information come from? How did they get that information? Now, the bigger problem is not so much always your student information system. It's all the other things that you tie into it, whether it be through the School Interoperability Framework, or SIF, whether it be just API access, whether it be direct access to the database. That information is a wealth of information that you really need to protect. Quite a few of the tech directors in the state started really kind of mind sharing, going through trying to find out what we thought the hack came from. And the best we could honestly think was, because it wasn't every student in the district, and in particular the students were getting a text and parents were used to getting text, we kind of thought maybe it came from like a Remind 101 or a student text app where they actually got into a teacher's account in one of those systems and found parental information. Parents who go in and set up accounts and sign up to get the texts. And then it seems very much more likely, because that's probably an easier system to break into than into Infinite Campus, which was the system Johnston used. So you really want to look at what you are allowing people to do, and the more information you give out, the more likely that information is at some point in time to be compromised. So how do we get through this? I thought Ross did a great job. Again, the rest of mine is a lot of repeat of what he said. Training your staff. I mean, you cannot train your staff enough on how to avoid getting compromised. The number one, of course, is social engineering, the phishing scams. And like Ross said, you don't have the Nigerian princes anymore. No one's asking for millions of dollars that people are falling for. It's very sophisticated. Ask the DNC and the RNC, how sophisticated was it? It was so sophisticated they got into their system. And all it takes is one person to fall for it to really kind of open the floodgates. So you can train them about that. We've talked about doing the self-phishing, going out, and if a teacher falls for it, then actually suspending their account until they go through the training again, and kind of doing that on a regular basis. Again, that's creating more work for me because I'm a one-person department, but isn't that work that I should be willing to do? So I don't know if we'll do that or not, but we really do try to talk to them every year. We do in-service on account security, and really upped it this year in terms of phishing. There's the brute force attack. I love that Ross talked about phrases versus complex passwords. The more complex you go with passwords, the more likely you are to write them down. I use 2 tools personally to maintain my passwords, one of which is on my cell phone. It's the Keeper app. It's a secure app that I have to have the password to get into. I can also use my fingerprint. But if that particular app, I have it set up that if I do 3 incorrect passwords, it wipes all of that information. So I do go in there and put in unique passwords, passphrases. But again, I love what Ross said about using phrases that you'll remember. How secure is my password.net, that site I just saw yesterday. I think it was Joe DeFore showed us that one. Interesting. I always wonder on those sites, you know, how safe is it to put in a bunch of passwords? Is somebody on the back end just collecting a whole bunch of passwords to use in some sort of brute force attack? But great information to have in finding out what it would take. But the phrases versus the passwords. One thing we often forget is the over-the-shoulder hacker, the person who is training themselves to watch your keystrokes to get your password. You know, if you're in a Starbucks, you're in a lobby of a hotel or somewhere where people are all around you and you're putting your password in, people are training themselves to figure out, you know, what finger movements equal what keystrokes and really get your password very quickly, which is why the shift key becomes even more important. You know, when you put in certain words, it doesn't matter how fast you type, someone will probably be able to, over your shoulder, find out that information. So train them about using the shift key, because that then completely changes what your password is based upon just keystrokes. So that's a nice one to think of that most people forget, is someone just looking over your shoulder, getting your password. And the keylogger software. We make our staff administrators of their computers so that they are allowed, you know, we try to treat them professionally. You are grown adults. We ask that if you install software, you make sure that you're licensed. The license has to remain in school. But again, as a department of one, it makes it a little easier, and then I deal with problems as they arise. It's going pretty well, but we have to be careful of keylogger or other types of malware being installed on their computers. We're relatively safe being on a Mac or a Chrome system, but not 100% safe. We do run antivirus. We run what we can to make sure this isn't happening. But once it's installed, remember, it's no different than someone putting in a skimmer and to get your credit card information, that keylogger software. And the other side of that is they're not just getting your passwords. They are actually getting all of your keystrokes that you are putting in. So that can be a little more scary or frightening than just your password, because it's also then finding all that information that you are typing in. So that's really where I was at. Timing wise, we're sitting at 12:09. I know there's still more time in here, but I've always been told that sooner or shorter is better than longer. So I'm gonna keep it to here. Again, there's my contact information. I did share out the slide deck in the chat. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those. But otherwise, that's what I've got from Iowa.
Thanks so much, Lance. Really appreciate it. Now, if anyone has additional questions, you can go ahead and put them in chat. Ross and Lance, you both thankfully focused on really practical things that people can do without funding, or really just basic stuff that people can pick up and do today. I'm wondering too, because we have some folks that work with policymakers on the call, and also people who are trying to figure out their budgets for the next year. So how can people better spend the money they have to create better security? And if they don't have that funding, how should they talk about the value of getting additional funding to build in additional security?
You can, one thought, again, sometimes I'm not a nice guy. I mean, go to, you know, if you're explaining to leadership, bringing examples from within your state. Here are school districts within our state that have had data breaches. These are the data breaches. These are the causes. This is because of training. This is because of phishing. You know, do we want to be them? Here's the cost associated to it. I gotta tell you, through training, if the training that you do just stops one single data breach, then it's paid off. Because the amount of, you know, the cost of these data breaches, whether it's through identity protection or the reputational harm or the potential, you know, FERPA violations that get reported as a result of it, those are going to be larger problems for your district.
Great. Anything to add, Lance?
In terms of just the budgetary items, all too often in our state, budgets are constantly declining, and we're trying to do more and more with less and less. Honestly, for one thing we've looked at and done is a couple of audits or reviews of systems, different systems, whether it was a review of the way we had our Google domain set up, to a short security domain, just actually having somebody come in and look at stuff. It was money well spent. Even if it told me that I had done things right, it's that sense of knowing at least I'm doing things correctly. So I think that's one area in budget to look at. What would it cost to actually bring in security experts to put this in place? And then secondly, do you have in place insurance for data breaches? A lot of school districts don't even know that exists. So go out and look and see if you can get digital security or digital insurance in case something does happen, because you would be liable for information that got out and damages that occur because of that. We looked at that and did purchase some, so we have that in place just in case. Equipment wise, I can never stress highly enough how nice a firewall is, but more importantly is, are you maintaining your firewall? Once it's up, that's great. But are you making sure you have all the patches in? Are you making sure you're looking at the reports and the logs and actually seeing what it's doing, rather than just assuming once it's in place, it's doing its job? So those are things I look at. We have no external facing, I shouldn't say, I have one external facing IP address. Everything else has to be done through VPN to get in. So even like Ross had talked about, having our HVAC systems, where we want the companies to come in and be able to do repairs off-site. As a rural district, we don't want to pay mileage for someone to come out and punch in 2 lines of code and then have to go back. We'd rather they be able to remote in our phone system, those kinds of apps and support. But we use VPN, so they have to have a client. We specify the user, we specify the IP address it can come from. So put a little money towards that piece of equipment to have in place also.
Great. Lance, you had mentioned cyber insurance. Can you talk a little more about that? I've gotten a lot of questions recently from both states and districts on the value of that, whether more people are adopting it, sort of what it covers. And Ross, certainly if you've heard anything on this front as well in your discussions with districts or states, would love for you to add as well.
So the cyber insurance part of it, we hadn't thought about it. Our insurance rep actually was talking to us and brought it up. And so my superintendent asked what I thought about it. And I was like, even at that point, I had never considered that that's something we should probably look at. I never even knew it was a thing. And once we started talking about it, so in Iowa, budget-wise, you have a management budget and operation budget, and management budgets usually have money because that's kind of where it's not a huge budget, but it doesn't go towards your daily expenses. And that's one of the things that can come out of management. So it really was a no-brainer for us. Is we have money in that pool, we'll spend it out of that pool, and it kind of covers us in the long run. I would just, if nothing else, recommend looking at it, talking to your school's insurance carrier, seeing if what it would cost, what it would look like, what it would cover. It's a good conversation to have, even if you do nothing with it. It's probably a great conversation to have if you end up using it, and it's the best conversation you ever had if you ever end up needing it.
Yeah, I think, as I've gone into the field, I've heard more about districts going this path. I think it's, sometimes it's regional. I see it, a lot of it in certain states. The real question is going to be, down the road when, people start having the data breaches and, what happens, when they try to use the insurance. But, I can't speak to whether the services are good or bad.
Great. We got a question in the chat about communicating about hacks to the community, specifically Lance, if you want to talk about what you heard the response was in the district that got hacked, and what you've been talking about sort of behind the scenes in terms of if there was some sort of breach, how you would work with communities. And then Ross, if you can talk about this maybe more generally and what you've heard from people.
So for us, since we weren't affected, we did have the time to craft or put together a nice communication to our constituents, our students, and our parents in regards to things that we do have in place, and that we take their security and their information seriously. we sent that out. We have a monthly newsletter that goes out. We're able to use, we have a messenger app that we send out information to parents. We were able to put it out that way. And then I did get 2 calls that I took personally asking, how vulnerable are we? And I said, how vulnerable, I can't answer that because I don't know, because I don't know what vulnerabilities we may have that I don't know about. But I said, as of yet, we keep an eye on it. We look at our firewall logs, we look at our access logs, and haven't seen it yet. So we've been very fortunate to have, again, being in a small district, I don't know that the eye of the world is upon us, but again, that's kind of thing. And I agree with Ross. Schools are going to be more and more targeted, just because they're realizing there's a cash cow there that eventually someone's going to have to pay out something, and it costs them very little to try it, and it makes them a lot of money if it's successful, whether it be ransomware, whether it be a full-blown hack, whether it be getting information and selling it. But schools traditionally have very lax security. It's just, in the early days of the internet, schools had, larger file storage than the average bear, because of educational pricing. And so hackers would try to get in just to have storage space, to store files on. I remember one of the first networks I installed, I found that someone was using me as basically a torrent, to store music so that somebody else, they could download hacked music or stolen music. Once I found out, I was like, so that's kind of when I started taking security a little more seriously. But schools, again, we have to do our best, based on what we have, and it's not always easy.
Was the music any good?
Some of it I thought I would like to keep for myself, and I'll say I didn't.
Yes. The same thing has happened to me before. I mean, if you're not careful, they're gonna come after you. It's just a matter of time. Trying to make yourself a harder target. What's the saying? You don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than the person running, with you. It's sometimes hackers can be really lazy, and they're going to go after the softer targets. Back to the original question about communication, I think a lot of this stems towards transparency with stakeholders, because it's one thing you say you have a breach and you go, well, we take security very seriously. We're sorry. This will never happen again. If you don't take that to heart, then you're just giving it lip service. Where if you don't actually if you say we're going to go review our policies and ensure this doesn't happen, if you don't actually review your policies or train people on the policies, then it is going to happen again. You're just being disingenuous with your staff. But student data is front and center, in the national conscious, right now. People are paying attention to this, and there's, Amelia's got some, great transparency guidance. We have, transparency guidance on PTAC. But what it really boils down to is, in the absence of knowing what's going on with their children's data, parents are going to assume the worst. So if you can be transparent, if you can, say what you're doing with the data, how are you protecting the data? Here's who you can call if you have questions about the data. Having training in the organization so that if our data does get found somewhere, or somebody calls us and says that there's a problem or we had a data breach, having your staff educated enough to know that, hey, this is important, I need to tell somebody. I've dealt with a data breach before. I will, eliminate all PII from it, but it was a pretty big organization where there was PII of theirs out on the internet, and a concerned citizen let us know about it. And it took us 2 days to talk to a human being to get them to turn that off, due to the complexities of their systems and not being able to reach a human being, having no numbers published, calling the help desk, we couldn't get in because we didn't have a student ID, and 0 and pound wasn't working. You called the switchboard. Hi, this is Ross Lemke from the U.S. Department of Education. Them? Who? U.S. Department of Education? Who are they? Are they some kind of vendor? Wow. So just even training the staff to know that to know that this stuff is important, and to know who to contact if there is a problem.
Thanks, Ross. Before we go to a question I just got emailed, I know we had the question about what might be trustworthy VPNs earlier, and I ran this by a friend who does a lot of security work, and he said he personally uses VPN Unlimited by Nordly. He noted that Google and Facebook, who of course have a lot of reasons to make sure their employees do not have issues, are using Citrix and/or Cisco for VPNs, and then OpenVPN is also widely used and is trustworthy. So just throwing those out there from the perspective of one security person. So next question that I just got via email. So Ross and Lance, what are the security issues that can come up with external apps, whether games or things that are essentially run by third parties, and how can you minimize those security risks?
I think one of the biggest ones is if you looked at this, what was it, a year and a half ago when Pokemon Go first came out. And what it was truthfully just lazy coders. All they did was use an older Google API to allow you, because people love the simplicity of a single login, whether it be through Facebook or, log in with my Facebook, log in with my Google. I like to click and be there. And so the coders just used an old API, and what it said was, give me access to everything inside of your Google account. And so rather than going through and saying what I really only need access to is your username and your password so that I can authenticate, but I won't save. So what does it actually, the risk is considerable on the third-party tools, especially those that use the APIs for authentication, as to what you're actually granting access to. I mean, how many times do we, during installation, just click yes, 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 because we want to hurry the installation process along without really reading what it is? So we look at APIs that tie into, especially with our Google for education stuff, and say, is this one that we want to allow? And we run the system currently where we allow all apps except for the ones that we block. And so I'm consistently looking through and trying to find new apps that we don't want our students or our teachers to have access to. And then looking very carefully, we don't run anything via CIF, but if you're doing anything CIF, if you're using a third-party tool that's connecting into maybe your student information system or somehow going into your Active Directory or your cloud-based directory, you're really going to want to look and determine what is it they are really getting, what are they doing with that data, and how much control do I have. And the last thing I tell people with any third-party tool, whether it be a filter, whether it be just another application your students may use, is do you have an audit log that you can go back to? I can't stress enough how important it is to be able to go and look through a log to see what happened, who did what, when. If nothing else, it is what I call a CYA policy, which is, cover your behind, that you can show you didn't do something. And the perfect example with that is we use GoGuardian with our Chromebooks, and originally GoGuardian didn't have an audit log. They had one, but you as an admin didn't have access to it. And we were testing it for them, and they asked, what kind of things do you want to see in place? And I said, I will not buy your product until you have an audit log, because one of the early tools they had was access to the webcam. And I need to prove that I am not accessing as an admin student webcams when I shouldn't be accessing student webcams. The fear of that alone will keep me from installing this. So they put in an audit log so I can show I've never once, accessed a webcam. And that's important too. So not only knowing what it does, but then having an audit trail to show that you did everything right.
I just want to reiterate everything that Lance said there. But you with apps, I mean, it's part of a larger vetting of your app providers too. I mean, it's apps or even services, SISs. There's hosting things in the cloud. You hear lots of big scary things about the cloud. If you're that one school district, maybe having something in the cloud could potentially be more secure than what you have on your own networks. Our expectation is that any cloud service provider is going to have at least the same level of security. We would presume for you that that provider is going to have at least the same level of security that you would otherwise use. But ideally, it's going to have better. If it's a really good service, hopefully they've locked everything down really well. I think your big concern are some of these new apps out there. Like you mentioned, Pokemon Go, lazy coding, not knowing any better. We've had exposure to some app providers. People calling us asking for some help with some vendors, and obviously there's the issues with user agreements and ones that might put them at odds with FERPA regarding data ownership or things like that. But other things like it's a service that's not going over HTTPS. Well, that's probably an issue. Or services that require you to go send student data through straight FTP 425, not secure. That could potentially not be reasonable either. So a lot of it's just doing your homework with these services.
Thanks, and I'll add to what both Ross and Lance said as well. It's also worth thinking about making sure teachers, as they are signing up for apps, if they're allowed to do so in your district, know not to fill in things like optional fields. A best privacy practice is making sure that there is the minimum information out there. So if there is ever a problem, you don't have a whole lot of information that has been breached. So letting people know that if something is optional, maybe don't enter it in just because a field exists on a web page to create a user account. You don't have to fill in all of that. So just adding that as well. And then I think our final question of the day, Ross and/or Lance, how can you minimize threats from students on your network? Probably the most recent prominent example is a college student who used a keylogger to change his grades, I think a total of 90 times. He ended up arrested by the FBI. But less extreme than that, I think, is what most districts are going to face. Students have access to our networks. They are using different services, websites on them every day. How can we minimize the vulnerability from those particular users, whether malicious or not?
Well, I'll go ahead. I guess this is Lance, and for us, it's a huge balancing act because you want students to learn, and you want them to have access to tools that they're going to have access to in the real world, and you ingrain as much as you can, for us anyway, the idea of digital citizenship, proper use. But you also have to mitigate your risks in terms of not giving them carte blanche access to your systems. And we've tried to weigh the difference of having, students on different SSIDs, students on different VLANs, but then we also know that we want our students in their Chromebooks to be able to cast without having to cross VLANs. We want to minimize our network traffic to increase our throughput. It's really kind of finding that balancing line, and by no means do I think we're perfect, and oftentimes I am thankful because it feels to me either my students are really good or it could be that they're really lazy, but I've never had a full-blown hacker out of one of my students. I've had some what I would call script kiddies, kids who try to do things they just find online. But the last thing I do is if I find a kid that has that kind of drive, that they want to be able to know these kinds of skill sets, is I put them on my student tech crew, and I really try to push that towards a positive use of things. And it's not 100% perfect. And again, don't think that I'm saying that, oh man, everything's well and rosy here, because we have issues like everybody else. I just do what I can as one person in my district to try and keep things going positively and try and allow kids to learn as best they can, and at the same time really trying to keep everything that we have as secure as I can.
Yeah, I see that I was on mute, but I would say if you want to, eliminate any risk of, students doing something bad on computers, you wouldn't give them access to anything, which of course is unreasonable. So it's a lot of it's really balancing convenience and security, because there's always going to be some element of risk with what you do. And, the more, rights that you give them, the more is, possibility that they could be doing something else with those, with those rights. I mean, I have my own personal example of a family member who, was in a school district, was one of the student helpers, helping the teachers set up PowerPoint and things like that. He had network credentials, and again, you talk script kiddie, just because he he took a tool that he downloaded off the internet and used it to escalate his access in Active Directory to, domain admin rights. So you're always going to have that element of risk, and it's, part of this is understanding what your risks are, and, kind of reducing your risk to a level that is acceptable for your organization.
Fantastic. Well, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Ross and Lance. This has been, I know, incredibly helpful for me, and I know from a lot of the chat comments for many others as well. So thank you, everyone. This is our last working group meeting of the 2017 year. I look forward to seeing all of you again at webinars in 2018. Have a wonderful holiday season, and thanks again for attending today.
No problem.
Thanks for having us, Amelia.